a lot of people ask us, like, why do we do so much of these reports? And for us, I think at BCG, it's what really drives us is about it's about understanding how the market works. And for me personally, I've always been frustrated about the lack of data about the market. And for us, we thought that it would be good to just kind of like go into the field ourselves and try to understand what exactly drives Filipinos, what exactly drives some of the behaviors that we are seeing day in and day out. And so the question is, why are we talking about the family? And I want to answer that with a picture. A picture of the dining table, a picture of like what you probably see every single day with your own family. And I think it's an interesting way to kind of like contrast how Asian markets and Filipino families behave versus some of our peers in the West. So if you go to, let's say, a French restaurant or a Spanish restaurant, typically people kind of like order individually for yourself, especially if you're going for like a 3-course menu or something. Everyone has their own appetizer, main course, and dessert. But how often does that happen in the Philippines? For us, it's always communal. It's always food being served in the table together for everyone to share. And I think most importantly, when someone orders, it's usually one person gets kind of like either gets nominated to order, or because they're the most hungry, they pick up the menu and order for the entire group. But typically, they do think about each other. It's not like they're ordering just for themselves. And I think it shows how we as Filipinos, we're actually a very familial, very community-driven society. And that's why it's important for us when you think about how does the market behave, how does the market work, it's important to not just think about an individual as a unit, but also about the family as a unit. So just to show a stat, these are global stats around what percentage of the households are single adult household. You find that in some markets in the West, countries like, let's say, Finland and Germany, more than half of the households there are just one person. But if you look at the same stat for the Philippines, we're actually way down on the right-hand side, where single digits, around 9% of households are single adult ones. Most of us really live in bigger households, whether that's direct, parents and children, or even kind of like extended ones. So today, in the next few minutes, what we'll basically explore are answers to 3 questions. Number 1 is what matters to the Filipino family? Number 2 is how does the family make decisions? And number 3 is how do Filipinos decide on several specific industries that we took a little bit of a deeper dive in around banking, healthcare, travel, and retail. This is going to be the most numbers-heavy slide. The only thing you need to take away is that this is a nationally representative survey. We interviewed 1,500 individuals, which, given the average household size of around 4.1, represents around 6,000 adults all in all. But basically, we controlled for income, we controlled for geography, we controlled for urban versus rural, and a bunch of different other social demographic variables. This was an interesting finding, and it was also one of the most, in a way, one of the most existential kind of like questions we asked ourselves at the beginning of the survey. Because when you ask people, what constitutes as a family, you get all sorts of different answers. Like obviously all of us have parents, some of us have children, but where exactly do you draw the line? And so what we ask is, in a way, like how does the family unit decide, and what kind of structures does this reveal for us? What we found, at least on our sample of around 1,500 respondents, was that when we think about the typical family of 2 adults, 2 children, that actually only represents around 43%, which are these 2 boxes on the upper left, 20% being nuclear single earners, and 23% being dual income nuclear families. What's interesting is that there are a lot of different types of structures as well. You have solo parents, which actually comprise around 14% of our base. You're getting a slightly smaller but growing number of people who are choosing to not have kids themselves. Basically, and you'll see a video of this later on where you have Filipino couples married, live by themselves, but they choose to use the money that they earn to basically go traveling instead and buying more goods for themselves, or maybe even buying a pet for themselves. And then the multi-earner families. And this is where things get a little bit more chaotic, meaning there are more people within one household, there are more generations within that structure. So you have a sandwich family where 11% of our respondents basically are comprised of like these grandparents, parents, and children. And then you even have these extended families. 1 out of 5 of our respondents belong to this, where you have not just the grandparents, the parents, and the kids, but you also have the extended cousins, uncles, aunts, and others. So we'll do a quick quiz, and there's really no wrong answer here. Every single one of these is in a way representative for several million people. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to ask our respondents, within your family, what are your top priorities? And we asked them to force rank it. The question for this room is, what do you think is the most common top priority for the Filipino family? Does anyone want to make a guess? Education? Good answer. Anyone else? So health was the most common. And then the next two were basically having a large savings fund and improving daily nutrition and food quality. These are pretty close to each other, around 70% or so. So while health edged out having a large savings fund by a couple of percentage points, I think we could kind of like say that these are pretty much like the top dreams to as many people. If you go up to 10,000, some of us could basically have this for a dinner budget for a family. But for them, a spend of up to 10,000, 2/3 or 64% of Filipinos already felt that this was significant enough that they might need to borrow or rely on other people. And so what does this show us? It shows us that, number one, health is really important in this country. Now you might be wondering, where do the other priorities stack? What we did, we ranked all of like the different priorities in terms of 2 axes. One axis is the horizontal axis, which is importance. It means that the more it is on the right, the more families in our respondent base selected it as a top priority for them. The vertical axis is progress, meaning among those who felt that it was important, we asked them, how far do you think you've progressed in achieving that priority for you and your family? And so we get these 4 quadrants on this chart. Upper right are the ones that we call attended, meaning really important for people, and also the ones that, to no surprise, they're able to dedicate sufficient resources and effort into it, and they're able to achieve it. Lower right means it's important, but for whatever reason, it has been difficult to achieve or to progress on it. Upper left are ones that are slightly less important, but maybe because they're slightly less difficult to achieve as well, progress has been able to be met. And neglected, which are the ones where it's not so important right now, and therefore I've deprioritized it for now. So these are the 15 boxes that you saw a while ago, the 15 priorities. You see on the upper right, 5 priorities. All of like the really important ones that we talked about a while ago are all up there. Around financial security to absorb health scares, improving daily nutrition, food quality, having a large savings fund, as well as paying for children's education, which is also one of our top 5. Starting a family business was seen as a way, in our previous report, we've seen it as a way for families to uplift themselves from poverty and also create more economic stability for themselves when they feel like they cannot rely on the formal sector. Unfortunately, that's also a place where, even if it's important, it has been a challenge for many families to achieve it. And then you have a few of the discretionary spend on the left, some of which have more progress on them, such as buying luxury items, which is subjective in terms of like what exactly does luxury mean. Pursuing hobbies and passion and purchasing appliances are also up there in terms of like, generally more easy to kind of like get to. And then you have quite a few of these other dreams that have been deprioritized or neglected in favor of all the other ones. Things like buying more land, things like moving into our dream home, moving to another country, traveling abroad. Some of these kind of like larger ticket kind of like ticket size kind of like spend have been put off to a later time. we talk a little bit about the priorities, and I think it's interesting to discuss why we think the five that we discussed a while ago are so up there. Our interpretation is that the top priorities are oriented around reducing risk about someone getting sick, or being able to pay for those bills once they do get sick. And in a way, this slide kind of like paints a picture of why. We ask families, what worries you? And you find that 60% or 58% are worried about one member in the family getting a serious illness. And you have quite a few of these other systemic shocks that could happen in the Philippines. Things around job loss, things around inflation, things around natural calamity, and others. Now, this survey was in the field around middle of this year. If we had it now, I suspect that some of these, like let's say the natural calamities, might actually get pushed up to be even more important than what it shows on this data. But I think what it shows is that a lot about being Filipino is being subjected to many of these external risks that many of us may not feel comfortable addressing ourselves, meaning we don't have direct control. But so what we do, we try to kind of like act on levers where we could at least build more stability so that we could absorb those systemic shocks. So we'll play through a video. This is one example of a family, and then I'll hand it over to Lance to kind of like go through some of the next few deep dive slides.
Lahat sila kumikilos, hindi lang ako. Kasi kung ako lang mag-isa, hindi ko kalayanin yun.
Originally kasi 10 kaming magkakapatid. So, kahit na yung iba malayo yung work, meron kaming GC, lagi kaming nag-video call. Yung nakatira sa bahay namin, nanay ko. Tapos ako, and then yung anak ko na college ngayon. And then yung bunso namin kapatid na nag-work sa may Santa Rosa, engineer. Para sa amin, yung sa sweldo namin, nagkakasya naman yung mga binabayaran namin na bills. No? Si nanay lang, pag sinasabi niya mahal na yung baboy, ganyan, humingi siya sa mga kapatid ko na iba.
Sa pagkain, ako ang bahala, kaso kulang. Kulang yung budget kasi mahal ang bilihin ngayon eh. Alam mo naman ngayon.
Pagka malaki yung gastos, ate ko talaga yung sinasabihan namin. Kumbaga parang siya yung pinaka-boss namin. Yung dati, yung na-hospital yung tatay ko. Na-hospital yung tatay ko kasi parang na-heart attack siya. Yun yung pinakamalaki gastos na napag-ambaga namin. Gumastos kami ng around 700,000. Na-achieve namin yung bayaran lahat yung bill. Pero yung, kumbaga, yung mga gastos namin, i-set aside na muna namin yung mga dapat magta-travel sana, ganyan. Para lang mabayaran namin, ma-cope up namin yung situation namin na yun.
Maigi pala yung madami kang anak, marami yung mag-aambag ng tulong. Pati yung mga hipag, yung pamilya ng mister ko, tumutulong din yun. Lahat sila kumikilos, hindi lang ako. Kasi kung ako lang mag-isa, hindi ko kalayanin yun.
Tagumpay, siguro yung magkaroon kami ng lugar, no, na nandun kami lahat, sama-sama kami, masaya kami. Halimbawa, sa Sikihor, ate ko kasi magpapatayo siya ng bahay sa Sikihor. Yan. Kung saan siya pupunta, doon din kami pupunta. So lagi akong, kung saan pupunta si ate, doon ako.
It's crazy, right? They're a family of 10, they're in their 40s, and wherever ate goes, even if it's to Sikihor, which is not close by to Laguna where they live today, they're gonna go with her. But I think that's, in some ways, the unfortunate side of the family. It's become the safety net by default of most people. And so they stick together knowing that, well, if all else fails, at least we have each other. I want to deep dive now and talk a little bit more about how Filipinos make decisions. So we saw earlier about what matters, but how do they actually make decisions? One of the first findings in the study is that the answer to that is a little bit more complicated. And it really depends on what people are deciding on. On this chart, you see basically different categories, from groceries to priorities to travel, all the way up to hardware. And you can see basically the orange bars, which represent whether those categories are decided on by one person, or the yellow bars, which means that they're decided on by multiple people. And you can see basically if a family is buying groceries, it's multiple people deciding. Everybody chooses what they add into the cart. When it comes to travel, people have opinions on where they should go, where they should stay, what they should see. When it comes to hardware, let dad decide. He'll pick the doorknobs. For every category here, there's also kind of a primary decider. Why do I share this? We share this because we all kind of intuitively know that this is true. In all our households, whether it's the families we grew up in or the families we have today, we all know that multiple people decide on the groceries. We all know that multiple people decide when you have to take out a loan. But why is it that our systems are not designed in this way? Why is it that when you have let's say a loyalty card membership in a supermarket, it's for one person? It can't be shared to other members of the family who also participate in the decision making. Why is it that dining out memberships are also just designed for one person, even though it's families that often dine together, right? And I think this is really one of the big findings in our survey. Multiple people make decisions on multiple things, yet we always design products, services, experiences as if it's always just for one person. Let me try to break this down and show you something a little bit more financial. So what we have here is basically the share of income for a family with 2 earners and a solo parent. The left side of the pair is basically the income. How is the income split? And then the right side is the spending. How is the spending divided? You can see in a nuclear dual earner family, the mom spends what she earns. The dad, his money goes to the kids. In the solo parent, you can see that the parent usually assigns a lot of decision making and the spending to the daughters, who end up taking a little bit more of that responsibility. This is basically based on the aggregate findings of the survey and what people said their families spend money on. Right? And so you can see, depending on the kind of structure you have, and if you look at the report, you'll see a page with all the flows of all the different families. The way money flows is very different, right? You have some families that basically share in their savings, so they have one savings pool for the whole family. You have some where it's all individual, it's all divided. Yet again, our banking apps, our fintech apps are all designed as if these flows don't exist, right? Even though we all know that this happens on a daily basis. And this also changes over time. So you can see, for example, that what you have here is basically the split of decision-making power across different family types. And you can see that in families with kids, as time goes by, the kids get older, they end up making more decisions. And again, we know this to be true, right? Maybe when we were younger, when we were still living with our parents, we wouldn't make any decisions. And then at some point, we decided where to eat, we decided what to buy. If you look at the sandwich families, you can see that there's kind of a changing of the guard. The parents or the grandparents hand over the control of the household to the father and mother. But look at what happens in an extended household. You have basically the grandparents owning the house, but over time, it actually coalesces into a committee of decision makers. 4 adults, even 5 sometimes, making decisions around what to buy, what to spend on, what to do. But I've never seen an experience where a company say, hey, we have a way to cater to the 5 people who are going to decide on the purchase of this washing machine. It's always just one person. OFWs, I think we can't proceed without talking about OFWs. We all have learned that they are the modern day heroes, that they make meaningful sacrifices to move abroad to provide for their family. But here's one thing we learned, or 2 things we learned about OFWs. What we asked them was, what % of your individual income do you contribute to your family? And the second, the bars on the right, are what % of the household budget you are basically responsible for. As you can basically see that for most OFWs, they are basically contributing more to the house, or they control a major part of the household budget, right? Especially parents, which are the majority of OFWs. They send home about 60% of their earnings, and they run 75% of the household budget. What we actually found is that OFWs are, for the most part, involved in either day-to-day decisions, so 25% are involved day-to-day, and 54% are involved in important matters. That means 80% of OFWs are making decisions around where to send the kids to school, what clothes to buy, what brand of shampoo that should go into the house, where they should open a bank account, what kind of loan they should take. Yet again, oftentimes when we see OFWs, we think, remittances. Yeah, they're the ones, all they're responsible for is sending the money. Or how often do we think about how can we make OFWs a part or more involved in the day-to-day decision making when they are already trying to do that today? I want to play another video. So a while ago, we shared the extended family, and we showed you how it works when you have like multiple people deciding. Now I want to show you a solo parent, and I want to show you how they make decisions, considering, and remember that this is about 14-15% of the Philippine population.
Ang pamilya ko ay siguro modern and inclusive. I'm a single mom. 6 po kami sa pamilya. Ako po, and then yung panganay kong anak na si Marius. 23 years old. And then yung bunso ko po na 7 years old, si Timothy. Actually, may special needs. It's mild autism yung diagnosis sa kanya. Ang pamilya ko ay siguro modern and inclusive. O tinuturing namin kapamilya si Irene. 5 years na po namin kasambahay. And then kasama namin yung partner niya, si Tisoy. And then yung anak nila na 8 months old. So sa umaga after work, pagdating ko ng bahay, I try as much as I can na maging active sa life ni Tim. Pag after lunchtime, diretso siya sa school. Ako naman, diretso sa kwarto, matutulog na. Usually mga 6, gising na ako niyan. And then magdi-dinner kami. Tapos after dinner, pasok sa work. And then si Irene na yun bahala sa mga bata. Siya na yung bahala sa bahay, siya lahat yung gawaing bahay, siya na.
Si ate po, mabait po yan eh. Para lang po kaming magkapatid po, ganyan. Kwentuhan, pagdadating siya.
Ako yung breadwinner ng family. Pero pag may mga major purchases akong nagagawin, actually kahit hindi major basta medyo mahal lang ng konti sa normal namin binibili. Kasama ko talaga si Marius mag-decide. Pagdating naman sa budget, especially menu sa bahay, si Irene yung nagde-decide.
Nakikita ko pong parang nahihirapan din si ate, kaya ginagawan ko na lang din po ng paraan kung paano ko po mapagkakasya yung binibigay niya para matulungan ko po siya. Kasi po mahal ko na din po sila. Dahil parang pamilya na po talaga yung tingin ko po sa kanila.
Si Tim talaga yung nagiging driving force sa akin. Hindi pwedeng sabihin ko na next time ka na mag-therapy na kasi wala tayong budget. Hindi pwede. Hindi ako pwedeng mag-stop eh. So kahit maraming challenges, kailangan mag-push pa rin, especially for Tim.
I think 2 things to take away from this video. 1, how many households have solo parent breadwinners who are supporting not 1 but 2 families? And I'm not talking about the kaliwaan kind, right? And the second, everybody here, or most of us here, I would say, probably have help at home. But why are they not, and we probably consider them part of the family to some extent, but why is it that they are not considered part of the commercial family, the social family? Why is it that, if I have a membership to my supermarket or my grocery, I'm the one who gets the points, when really it's probably the yaya who's making the purchases? Or if I have a bank account, why is it that it's so hard to get a supplementary credit card or a kind of a shared bank account with my help, who is maybe making a lot of the purchases for the household, right? So I'd encourage us to think a little bit about how can we think about not just who are family by blood, but who lives under the roofs that we call home. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker. We're going to go deep dive into 4 different categories. The full insights are in the report. They're also online. But I'll share just a little bit of the interesting findings we learned across the different segments. So let's start with banking. I love to start with this little game. We have a couple words here that I'm sure all of us know, but they are words that talk about how we manage money, but don't quite have a translation in English. Does anybody want to just shout out, what is abono? But it's advanced, but there's an expectation to get paid back, right? It's very, very, very important, right? You will get paid back if you make abono. What's ambag? Yeah, chipping in towards a shared goal, right? Balato. Commission. I like that. It's a share of an unexpected windfall. Paluwagan. It's like a lending, a rotating savings pool. Pakikisama in the financial context. It's usually contributing out of desire to maintain social harmony. I might not agree with it, but I will give money just so we can all be friends. What about pasalo? Taking over somebody's loan. Toka. Assignment. Yeah, you're assigned task. And then I think we all know what utang na loob is. Why do I share these words? I share these words because we all know these words. We all talk about money in this way. But I've never seen a banking app, I've never seen a fintech app have any of these features. Where is the ambag feature in my bank? Where is the toka feature? If I'm in a dual income household with no kids, me and my wife are probably balancing every decision together. But why is it so hard to see what we're spending on each other's credit cards, for example, or in each other's bank accounts? So why isn't this all part of the one kind of banking app or fintech apps and mobile wallets that we use every day? Even if, as we saw here, we all know that these words, we all know what these words mean. The second thing we learned in the finance space is that oftentimes we think about the banking penetration as what percent of adults have bank accounts or what percent of adults have mobile wallets. But here's one of the interesting findings we saw. if you look at the mobile wallet penetration and the bank account penetration, the percent of adults that have accounts basically flattens out once you get to the middle class level, C3, C2. Which means that even as you get wealthier, the adults are not more likely to have bank accounts. And in some ways, the way I look at this is, well, maybe this is just how they decide to manage their money. Even if you get to the AB level, if there's somebody in the house with a GCash or Maya account, or somebody with a, whatever bank account you have, that's enough. You don't need every adult with their own account because that's not how we manage money. And so I think oftentimes we look at it and we say, well, we don't have enough banking penetration, we don't have enough mobile wallet penetration. But I think if you take a household view, which is how they manage their money anyway, I think things are looking pretty good. The other thing we looked at is financial literacy. So if you think about financial literacy, one way to look at it is how you progress from having no formal account to having a mobile wallet, a bank account, some kind of credit, and then an investment of some sort. And what we looked at here is basically how many different kinds of financial services do households have. And I think if you look at the yellow bars, which represent 3 to 4 account types, which means you've gone past bank accounts, you now have loans, or formal loans, not informal loans, you can see that at the C3 level and up, it's already close to about 70, 80%, right? And it just gets higher as you go. So again, if you take a individual view, you say, oh, investments is quite low, wealth management is quite low. But if you take a household view, I think you start to see, no, actually, these already exist and they are doing quite well. And oftentimes we try to say that we need more adults to sign up for our banking apps or our banking products. When in reality, I think what we need to think about is, how do we get more of the household participating? Because in many households that we saw, I think you'll see it in the report as well, they manage their savings together, they manage their investments together, they manage their loans together, right? But oftentimes we only look at them as individuals. Let's talk about health. So health was obviously one of the top findings in the survey. One of the things we saw and we learned is that families value health, which is a good thing, but they're actually engaging a little bit more proactively in the health system than maybe we would have imagined. So on the left-hand side, we saw that about 86%, 70%, basically a good number of families believe in being proactive about their health. And we asked them how often they seek different services, from vaccinations to medical checkups, health screenings, dental checkups, and gym and sports activities. And generally, you see that people are seeking them out, or they're doing them if they are convenient. So I think we are thankfully in a place where health is particularly valued. But where is the challenge? The challenge we found is in the mismatch between who needs the healthcare and who is covered by healthcare. So one of the things we asked people was, if a certain symptom arises, whether a common illness like a cough or a cold, or something a little bit unusual like maybe a chest pain, what actions do you take? And so you can see that most adults are willing to delay their own care for the same symptoms. They will not do anything for themselves, but they will send their child to the doctor or send their aging parent to the doctor. But when you look on the right-hand side and you think about who actually has an HMO, it's probably people like us, healthy, working professionals. And you can see at least from our survey, about 47% of the adults said they were covered by some kind of HMO, but only 15% of children and about 27% of seniors. So I think this is the other big finding we saw. It's that families are prioritizing the health of the vulnerable, but those vulnerable individuals are not necessarily covered by the HMO plans that exist today. Lastly, I'll talk about retail. Look, I think one of the things we wanted to ask is, are malls still relevant? The answer is yes, they're still very much relevant. And they're relevant for groceries and they're relevant for dining out. And so we saw that was still very much the main reason why families went to malls. Clothes, shopping, entertainment, all these things are important, more or less pretty flat by income. And they're usually 3rd through 7th or 8th in rank. This notion of people go to the malls for aircon to make palamig, no longer true. I guess aircon is everywhere now. Interestingly enough, the same way we saw that there are kind of gender differences in category, there are also gender differences in choosing where to go in a mall. So what you see here basically is who is deciding. Blue is mostly male, red is mostly female, purple is a mix of the two. You can see again, hardware is very much a male category, personal care very much female. Everything else I think is a little bit more a conversation, something that's decided by both. And earlier we showed you that groceries tended to be this category that's like multiple people spend on. I think also interesting to know that even within groceries, the decision-making tends to vary. You have some things like packaged snacks, which multiple people want to decide on. Everybody picks their favorite brand of snacks. And other things like baby care, pet care, tends to be delegated to the main shopper, which is usually the mother. Again, I say this because whatever we're selling, oftentimes it's not just one person who's deciding. It's actually multiple people. One last video, then we'll wrap it up. This is a single earner breadwinner family. I think when you think of a middle-class Filipino family working their way up, this is probably the story you're imagining. So I'd love you to listen to this.
Pangarap ko sa pamilya ko is magkaroon kami ng stable life. Yung may freedom ka sa lahat. Lumaki po kasi ako mahirap talaga. Kasi itong bahay na pong ito, ang itsura po nito para siyang junk shop.
Na-witness ko po yun.
Yun. Kahit pa paano po, napaayos po namin siya. Kahit nakaipon kami from ang mga freelance ko po before. Kami ay 6 dito sa aming bahay. Ako, yung wife ko, si Fatima. Yung panganay ko, si Zia. Yung pangalawa ko, si Enyas. Yung sister-in-law ko, si Nazarene. Since ako po yung mismong nag-provide ng income. Bale, hindi ko po nahawakan yung sahod ko talaga. Sa kanya talaga direkta. Siya na po yung may power to decide.
Pagdating po ng sahod, ang number 1 po namin ginagawa, bayad ng bills. Then, kung ano po, magkano po yung natira doon, ako po yung bahala kung paano ko po siya pagkakasyahin. Kapag may free time tsaka may extra po talagang money, mas priority po namin yung mag-bonding po kami sa family.
Pangarap ko sa pamilya ko is magkaroon kami ng stable life. Yung hindi mo kailangan lumapit sa ibang tao pag nangangailangan ka. Yung hindi mo na kailangang magdala ng calculator pag nag-grocery ka. Yung hindi mo na kailangang tumingin sa menu pag kakain ka sa restaurants. Yung may freedom ka sa lahat.
I want to end with 5 thought starters, things to think about regardless of what kind of business, what kind of organization that you might be a part of. The first thing is the consumer. When we say the consumer, it's actually usually not an individual. It's usually a household coalition, right? Multiple people deciding. And so the question is, how do we appeal to a consortium of decision makers as opposed to just individuals? Second, health, I think, remains the household's deepest vulnerability. I think the question is, how do we provide the right care or the right products when Filipinos are in need of help and need assistance? Because healthcare emergencies can come out of nowhere. They can be very disruptive. And I think, as we saw earlier, we are very ill-equipped to deal with them. Third, the aspirations of Filipinos are very modest. We're not dreaming of Lamborghinis and Rolls Royces, and we're thinking about very simple things like, how do you go to the grocery without having to bring a calculator? And I think the question is, how do you build these relationships with families when they are still, I would say, in their lower middle class and climbing their way up the ladder, such that when they become wealthier, they have more spending power, they will remember our brand and they will trust our brand. Fourth, every household structure has a very distinct, very unique flow of money and influence. Again, how do you tailor our products and services to match these unique realities of either multiple people trying to decide or one person having all the decision-making power in a household? It's very different. I think it's important to understand that. And lastly, I think OFWs remain quite connected to their families despite the distance. How do we do more for them other than just trying to help them remit money faster, cheaper, better, right? There's so much more. They want to be involved. They want to be included. So how do we make them part of that?